Hey guys, welcome to Backstage with Millionaires. I'm Caleb.
I'm Varun.
And I am Prithvi, and today we are celebrating an amazing milestone in the journey of Backstage with Millionaires because we have just crossed 10,000 subscribers. These are 10,000 awesome people like you who have been supporting us from day one, who have been watching our videos, sharing our videos, liking them and commenting on them and getting indulged in that amazing discussions that we have had in the comment section of the videos. So thank you very much because it really means a lot to us.
So we wanted to make a video about why we decided to start Backstage with Millionaires and just how we all got here to this point in our lives as people. As a lot of you guys already know, I'm Canadian, which is weird because I'm making videos about India, I'm making videos about India's startup ecosystem. So I first just want to walk you guys through that. Like, how did I end up here in India? My first trip to India was back in 2016, and I came to Delhi for about 3 weeks. And it was a very short trip, and I didn't really get an idea of what India as a whole was like during that trip. And then I went back to Canada. I was studying photography in Vancouver, but that trip really left an impression on me. And it left an impression on me because, and this is a weird thing to say because now I live here and it's a choice, I've chosen to be here. Intentionally, I'm not living in Canada. But the reason that India left an impression on me back in 2016 was that it made me feel so uncomfortable. You know, you step off the plane and if you're Indian and you're watching this, then all of these things are just gonna seem like normal everyday things, right? But when you're a foreigner, and especially when you're coming from a place like, for example, Vancouver, which is just known for being picturesque, it's extremely clean. There's, noise pollution isn't really a thing. People don't stare at you. They avoid getting into your personal space. There's all these sort of like social norms that we're accustomed to. But then when you come to India, all of those things disappear, right? All of a sudden, it's the complete opposite. It's like you're turning the world upside down. You're flipping it on its head, and you've got trash littering the streets. You've got animals walking across the road. People are driving in the opposite lane. You've got so much noise. You've got people staring at you. You've got dust. It's overwhelming. The chaos is just overwhelming for someone like me. And I didn't like that about myself. I didn't want to be overwhelmed. And so I saw India kind of as like a personal challenge. Like I thought, imagine if someday I could live in this country and just be used to all this, right? Where it doesn't faze me. I'm like one of these people that's walking down on the sidewalk, one of these Indian people that isn't bothered by it. I was envious of Indian people because of how desensitized they were to all of this chaos. And I don't know if that's weird. Like I know personally I love to challenge myself in really crazy ways. And this, I saw it as a challenge. So I came back to India in December of 2016. Again, in 2016, it was at the end of the year. And I actually saw a little bit of India when I took a train to Agra and saw the Taj Mahal. And that's all it really took. That one train ride, looking out the window, sometimes the train would stop and I would hop off and just kind of take a look around and really enjoy and revel in the fact that I was in India, not Delhi. I mean, Delhi is some representation of what India is. But I think once you get out of the major cities and you're kind of just out there in the rural Indian landscape, that's when you really feel like you're here. Like this is what India really is. So my first trip in 2016 captured my curiosity, but my second trip made me realize that I really did want to experience India. I wanted to explore India properly. So after that trip, I went back to Canada and I did another semester of photography school, but India was really like there, it had moved from the back of my mind to the forefront of my mind. And I thought, why am I doing photography here and I'm doing it for grades, right? I'm doing it for that A or B or C, grade on the report card. Maybe I should just go and test myself as a photographer and go to India and see what I can accomplish, right? So I decided to drop out. And I dropped out and I moved to India officially in May of 2017. And I've been here pretty much ever since. So less than 2 weeks after arriving back in Delhi, a friend of mine and I decided to go backpacking across the country. This was a friend from university and we pretty much just did the tourist triangle. We saw, again, I went to the Taj, that was nice. We went to Banaras, we went to Mumbai, we went to Goa. Goa was the first time that I ever got a chance to drive a scooter, which was amazing, because now here in Bangalore, I drive a scooter. Well, I did drive a scooter before the pandemic pretty much every single day. And then after Goa, we parted ways. My friend had to get back to Canada. And so I ended up going to Bihar on my own, and I visited Bodh Gaya before going back to Delhi. So after returning to Delhi, I met someone. And that really gave me a pretty solid reason to try to stay in India as best I could. Even when things got difficult, she was the reason that I thought, I need to really try my best to try to stay here for as long as I possibly can. And one thing that unites us, one thing that her and I have in common, is that we love to travel. And we've been on a couple of trips here in India together. We've been to places like Shillong, we've been to Kulu, we've been to Pondicherry, we've been to Coimbatore, we've been to Uti, and we've been to Jaipur. And I wanna highlight that Jaipur trip because if I hadn't gone there, the course of my life would be completely different. My girlfriend was still in Delhi. She hadn't taken leave from work yet to come and join me, and so I was on my own. And usually when I'm on my own, I try very hard to save money on things like accommodation, right? So in this instance, I was using a platform called Couchsurfing. So my Couchsurfing host during this trip in Jaipur was this awesome guy who actually introduced me for the first time ever to the joys of poha and chai for breakfast, and he had a roommate. And this roommate was getting married in a couple of days, and when I told them that I had never been to an Indian wedding, they said, you have to come. And so I stayed in Jaipur, and then my girlfriend came from Delhi and joined me for 2 days, and then she went back because she had work. And then after that, I went to this wedding. And at this wedding, I met someone very important, and this person was Prithvi.
So this is how we met. As Caleb has already mentioned, this was a typical Rajasthani wedding, which was of a friend of mine called Gagan. And he runs a YouTube channel called Gagan Chaudhary, in case you want to check him out. He makes videos on automobiles, on cars and bikes. So that was the first time that we met. And one thing that got me interested in talking to Caleb was the fact that he mentioned that he has studied photography and videography in a college. So that was something new for me because, come on, who studies photography and videography in a college in India? So that was the time that I wanted to know more about the kind of project that he was doing, about the kind of project that he wanted to do, and also the kind of plans that he had in India, because till that time I think he was pretty certain that he was planning to be in India for a while. So that got both of us talking, and after 2 or 3 days of wedding ceremonies, we traveled back to Delhi, and I kept in touch with him till the time I went to him with the idea of Backstage with Millionaires. But now that before I start talking about Backstage with Millionaires, I want to take a step back and talk about a little bit about my experience, about my journey as an entrepreneur, about my experience as a startup guy, because a lot of people keep on asking me in the kind of videos that I do, in the kind of live videos and the startup 101 videos that I do, is what is the kind of experience that I have with startups. I started working very, very early in my life when I was just 9 or 10 years of age, when I got my first computer at home. So I still did not have access to internet. I still did not have, I always had to go to a cyber cafe to access internet. So that was the time that I got access to a few books, and I started coding. I started making small programs. That was the time that Flash games were picking up. So that was the time of websites like Japak. It was the time of miniclip.com. I don't know how many of you remember them, but that's when I started to research more and more about programming, about coding, about Flash games. After a couple of years of me getting a computer and me started coding, I got introduced to the kind of programs, the kind of web portals that we had, which provided the opportunities for freelancers to work for other people. And that's when I started working for people around the globe, because in India still there was no one who was taking me seriously, because I was just a 12, 13-year-old kid. This is when I started working for different people. That's when I got my first experience working as a coder, a programmer, or an entrepreneur, like whatever you want to tell that. So after, once I turned 14, that's when I moved to Bangalore after completing my 10th standard. And that was the first time that I was actually in the startup city of India. Before that time, I started reaching out to a lot of people, sending them cold emails about me being a 14-year-old, wanting to meet them. So obviously 99% of the people, 99% of the entrepreneurs who were established in Bangalore at that time, they sort of just never replied back. But a few people who replied back, and I started talking to them. I started talking to them about the kind of experience that they had, about the kind of things that they were doing. And a couple of years after that, in 2012, as a 16-year-old, I dropped out of my high school, and that's when I started my first office as a 17-year-old. So my first company that I started was a mobile phone comparison website, which was later sold to a US-based guy. And there I started comparing mobile phones because that was a time that smartphones were just getting started. We just had a few full touchscreen phones, and that's when I started with that portal, which could give people the option to compare their mobile phones, compare different mobile phones with the kind of specifications that they had in mind. So that was like I really got a really good response with that, and within a year and a half, someone reached out to me from the US, and he just bought the entire project. And after that, I started again with something in technology media, which I sold in 2016 before moving back to Rajasthan. So till the time in 2016, once I was pretty certain I wanted to do something in community service, I wanted to do some sort of social service or work with the government. So I moved back to Rajasthan in Jaipur, and I started working with the government of Rajasthan with the kind of projects that they were doing. So that was the time that Digital India was picking up. This was the time that Prime Minister Modi was really coming up with the ideas of Startup India, about Digital India, and about a lot of schemes which were centric to youth. And Rajasthan is never known as a startup city, so I moved back to Rajasthan to start a community called Jaipur Startups, and that's when I got in touch with the government of Rajasthan, and I did a lot of programs with a lot of colleges in the rural parts, where I trained these rural students and rural kids about entrepreneurship. I started telling them about the kind of schemes that the government is running, which they could get benefited from. So that ran on for almost a year, and in that I went to a lot of colleges. I met a lot of professionals, I met a lot of government officials, and that was something that really gave me an idea about what rural Rajasthan was like, or for that fact what rural India was like, and what was the kind of difference between a city like Bangalore and about a typical village in Rajasthan or Haryana for that fact. In 2017, I started with my latest venture, which was called The Indian Wire, and with which I'm still associated in limited capacity. The Indian Wire was again a media portal where we started reporting news, fact-based news. We were very certain that we will only do positive news, we will only do opinion-less news, because there are a lot of media portals who are doing opinion-based news. So we really wanted to be a fact-based news portal, and we have been very successful in doing that. That is another one of my most successful projects that I've been involved into. And while I was working on that full-time, that's when I wanted to do something apart from the text-based media. I wanted to do something in the video-based media as well. And this is when the idea of Backstage Millionaires came in. And this is when obviously this was around the same time that I met Caleb, and this is the same time that I pitched him this idea in November of 2018.
So I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. When I first heard Prithvi explain his idea for Backstage with Millionaires, I wasn't sold. And the reason I wasn't sold was that I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. I didn't know anything about startups. I'd never worked in a startup. And so when he said, do you want to be my co-founder? I didn't even know what a co-founder was. My knowledge of startups was zero. But then he explained it to me, and he said, normally co-founders complement each other. They complement each other's skill sets. So he knows entrepreneurship like the back of his hand. He has tons of experience there, and he also has a lot of connections, right? And so he said, listen, I'll handle all of the nitty-gritty startup stuff. I'll reach out to these entrepreneurs. I'll set up the interviews. I'll talk shop with these guys. I understand them. I speak their language. And you're the photographer, you're the videographer. You understand cameras, you understand tripods, microphones, you know how to edit video. So you'll be in charge of that stuff. You'll be the technical co-founder, and I'll be the one who actually, works the magic when we're actually there in somebody's office for the first time and we're asking them questions about their journey as an entrepreneur. And so when he explained it that way, it made sense. I thought, okay, now I get it. I don't need to know anything about startups. I don't need to know anything about entrepreneurship. I just need to show up with my camera and my skills as a photographer and as a videographer.
So once I ended up convincing Caleb, that was actually the first time that we started working. And because we had not worked together on any project before that, it was certainly we were getting to know each other. We were trying to make the thing work in the busy city of Delhi. And that was, so we had around a month before the channel went live on 1st of January 2019, and all of December was really a crazy ride, because that was the time that I was scheduling interviews. I was reaching out to people. I was trying to convince them to be interviewed for a channel which was not even existing till then. So 3 people that we interviewed for the first 5 videos. So we had first 5 videos going live on 1st of January, and 3 people out of them were my personal contacts, and 2 of them were not really my personal contacts, and I had to actually do a lot of efforts to convince them to be interviewed for a channel which was still going live, which was still in the idea phase. So that was something that really taught me a lot about cold calling, cold emailing, and those were the things which obviously prepared us for the journey that came after that. And I still remember the first ever video that we were shooting with Yatin Kithakur. The camera went off.
Co-founder of Free Charge at one of the events in 2014.
From there to now,
entrepreneurship has become mainstream.
So we were just connecting those mic to the camera, and once the camera went off, the voice went off as well. And there was another time when we were actually looking for some camera lights, and we ended up waiting for so long that we had to cancel an interview. So all of these things obviously were preparing us for the journey which was coming ahead of that. But that 1 month was certainly so crazy even before we went live. So once we went live, obviously, just I think a week after Caleb went back to Bangalore, I was still in Delhi, and that was the time when we were actually thinking about how we will really take up this.
So when I got back to Bangalore, I was definitely more than a little bit worried, because up until this point, we had been that co-founder duo, right? Our skills had complemented each other's, and so when we went to interviews, we went together and we left together. But now I was in Bangalore and I was on my own. Prithvi was still in charge of outreach. He was still in charge of scheduling the interviews, but that's pretty much all he could do from his side over in Delhi. Every time that I walked into a new office and shook a new entrepreneur's hand, I was completely on my own. And that actually is a lot harder than it probably seems. And then we made it even more complicated in September of 2019 when I finally decided, you know what? These videos that we're making, these monologue interviews where it's only one-sided, right? I'm just pointing the camera at the entrepreneur and nobody is seeing me. Nobody is seeing a host of the show. And so every video is essentially being hosted by the entrepreneur who I'm interviewing, but it's a one-way interview, right? And so in September of 2019, we had this light bulb moment where we thought, why don't we do two-way interviews? And so I stepped in front of the camera, which made it even more complicated, right? Because not only do I have to set up the camera angle and the microphone for this entrepreneur, but I have to do it for myself as well, right? But this tweak in the formula, going from one-way interviews to two-way interviews, was actually like the first time that we had ever tried something new. And it was great. The response that we got was really positive. We started getting more views on the videos, not a lot more, but definitely more than we had been in the past, because the videos were just more engaging. And it was actually very timely that we decided to start doing these two-way interviews, because less than 2 months after we started that, I went back to Delhi. Prithvi had set up a ton of interviews with a bunch of interesting entrepreneurs that were based out of Delhi and Gurgaon and Noida. And so I went over there, and the first interview that we filmed was with an entrepreneur by the name of Arman Sood. Arman is the co-founder of Sleepy Owl Coffee, and it was actually at that interview that I met Varun.
So yeah, that interview was my first ever experience with Backstage with Millionaires, and at that time I was not completely sure that I would actually end up working full-time with these guys. So while this was the first time I was meeting Caleb, I'd already known Prithvi for about more than a year. So before I tell you how and where I actually met Prithvi, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So like most guys, I completed my engineering, but after that I went on to work with my cousin who had a startup of his own. And since both of us were engineers and neither of us had any business sense, the startup pretty much failed after a couple of months. And after that, I went on to work in IT, but I had pretty much lost interest. So I was looking for a way out. And that's when I decided to move to Bangalore and start fresh in a different field apart from IT. And while I was looking for jobs in Bangalore, I ended up interviewing with Prithvi for his online news platform called The Indian Wire. And that's where I ended up writing articles about startups and entrepreneurship. And until this point, I had barely any understanding or knowledge about startups or entrepreneurship apart from my couple of months at a failed startup. But writing on these topics actually gave me an opportunity to learn and understand about this space and how Indian entrepreneurs were actually making a positive impact. But like I said, I was still trying to figure things out for myself, and I wanted to try a few more things before I committed to anything. So after that, I went on to work at a PR agency back in Delhi. But that experience with Prithvi stayed with me. So while me and Prithvi were back in Delhi, we met up at his office just about the time when Caleb was coming back to Delhi. And it was during that meeting when Prithvi actually told me about his new little project called the Backstage with Millionaires. And since we had worked together previously, and he knew that even I was starting to get interested in startups, so he even invited me to tag along with them for a couple of interviews. And that's how all of us ended up at the Sleepy Owl interview. The interviews went amazing, and I was all excited to be a part of Backstage with Millionaires. But at the same time, I was also feeling a little out of place, considering I had limited skills and limited experience. And none of it had anything to do with shooting videos, editing them, or even scheduling interviews, which was everything that they were doing. The only thing I shared with them was a common interest in startups and entrepreneurship, and which was mostly thanks to Prithvi that I'd gained over the last few years. So after the interviews were done, Caleb went back to Bangalore, and me and Prithvi stayed back in Delhi. So while I'd started to help Caleb with online distribution of the videos through different social media platforms, there was not a lot that I could do from here, since most of the work still involved shooting videos, interviewing, which was all Caleb had to do alone in Bangalore. So we decided it was best for all of us to move to Bangalore. So I reached Bangalore in February of this year, and I just started to assist Caleb and was beginning to understand the process of shooting videos. And that's when the coronavirus had reached India, which meant that the whole country was suddenly in lockdown. And that's when we had to change everything that we have been doing until this point.
We thought about doing video chat interviews to replace our in-person interviews, but we were really proud at that point in time of the quality of our videos, and we didn't want to compromise on that. We didn't want to have these, the grainy webcam footage that you see in a lot of these interview videos. And we also didn't think that the pandemic would end up lasting so long. We thought, okay, maybe 2, 3, 4 months tops, and then we'll be right back at it. So in the meantime, let's do some experiments. And we had been posting pretty consistently since the beginning of the channel, 2 interviews every single week. We had a couple of slip-ups here and there, but for the most part, 2 interviews per week. And so we thought, let's make 2 series to replace these 2 interviews. And so the first series that we did were top 10 videos. And these videos did really well, basically taking the top 10 startups in any particular sector, be it SaaS, be it EdTech, be it FinTech, any sector that you can think of, we wanted to make a video about it and focusing in on India. And then the other series that we were doing was weekly news videos, where I come on and I basically talk about all of the news that has happened over the course of the last week. And so yeah, those are our 2 series that we started off with to replace the interviews. And we still haven't gone back to interviews, although we really do want to get back into interviews. We're trying to figure out the best way to do that. We had floated the idea of Instagram, and the response that we got was that, why are you going to change platforms? Why are you going to post videos on Instagram when you've been consistently posting it on YouTube? We're hoping to start doing interviews again at some point in the not too distant future. And then also Prithvi has been coming on the weekends to do live streams very recently. He's also doing his own Startup 101 series where he talks about the basics of entrepreneurship, some of the terminology. So yeah, things have definitely changed. And I'm going to be honest, it kind of feels bad to say this, but the pandemic has been a huge blessing for our channel. I know a lot of people have suffered because of this pandemic. Many people have lost their lives, they've lost their loved ones. But for us personally, for Backstage with Millionaires, this pandemic forced us to change our content. We had to change our strategy. We had to experiment with new things. And we want to keep moving in that direction. We want to keep experimenting. We want to keep trying new things. And we want to, of course, keep increasing the quality of our videos. But the only reason why we feel confident enough to do that, instead of just locking ourselves into 1 or 2 different types of content, for example, like we're only going to do the weekly news and we're only going to do top 10 videos because those are the safe options. But we're actually trying new things because we feel like you guys are with us, like you guys support us, that you're enjoying the experiments that we've been trying out, and that you want to see more. And the reason that we know that is from the comment section, the conversations that I've had with so many of you guys, the conversations that Varun has had, the conversations that Prithvi has had, and also the turnout for these live streams that Prithvi has been doing. That's really exciting for us to see. We didn't know how it was going to go. We were kind of worried that no one would show up, but you guys did turn out for that. You tuned in, you asked your questions, you supported us, and we're really thankful for that. We're really thankful for you, all 10,000 of you, for being a part of Backstage with Millionaires.
In the end, I don't think none of this would have been possible without the love and support that you guys have given us. So I would like to thank all of you, all 10,000 of you. Thanks for being a part of Backstage with Millionaires. Thanks for your amazing comments, and more importantly, thanks for your valuable feedback that has helped us improve every single day.
So coming to the end of the video, I want to thank you once again for being a part of the journey at Backstage with Millionaires. Thank you very much for supporting us right from day one. And this is just the beginning. This is just the day one. And we certainly plan to keep bringing more and more content about startups, about entrepreneurship, and we certainly want to keep experimenting with the kind of content that we are doing on this channel. And I really hope that you will keep supporting us just like you have been. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.